Greetings, this is Jed Shlackman here again for part 2 or the second installment of the video I'm doing on the topic of emotional healing, holistic mental health in the age of disconnection. And again, I'll be reading contents from an article from the Midwestern Doctor blog. That's midwesterndoctor.com. The article there is called it's called Emotional Health in the Age of Disconnection. So on that blog we covered some of the initial portions of it, looking into how our society deals with emotions and emotional distress, some of the economic and social factors. And we're coming now to a part of the article with the headline of Drugs and Alcohol. Since our culture does not teach us practical ways of coping with emotional difficulties, particularly emotional pain, one of the most common approaches people adopt is self-medicating with substances. I find this particularly tragic because everyone knows this is not a good approach, yet the media continually promotes it because so much money is made from it. Because of this, much in the same way the pharmaceutical industry has, through decades of work, successfully created a pill culture where people pop pills rather than taking responsibility for their health, we also have a drug culture for mental health. In the case of substances, this is a real shame because using the substance to shield oneself from emotional discomfort takes away the individual's ability to develop mature coping skills for emotional distress. For instance, I have seen many cases where patients who began smoking marijuana in childhood to deal with emotional pain never stopped using it for that purpose, and by adulthood were effectively crippled emotionally as they had immense difficulty dealing with any type of stressful situation. Generally speaking, the substances used for this purpose act similarly. They either suppress or disconnect the user from their emotional discomfort, along with many other aspects of their body, mind, and spirit. By doing so, the challenging emotion lodges deeper within them and creates more severe issues, which sadly then requires more self-medication. When you also consider that the media primes us to crave temporary spikes of dopamine and the addictive nature of many of these substances, the problem quickly compounds itself, and not surprisingly, addicts are sadly quite common. Although this is probably ultimately not possible to determine, my general impression is that people are much more susceptible to getting addicted to substances now than in the past. E.g., many of the current illegal drugs used to be freely handed out at pharmacies. For example, in the early 20th century, and this is my interjection, you could get something like cannabis or cocaine at a pharmacy over the counter. So they weren't quote-unquote controlled substances way back then. And back then, yes, there were addicts, but it wasn't as much of a major social issue with those substances as it is in the current time. And the author of the article I'm reading from puts here a note: if you study the history of opium, e.g. the Opium Wars, it is a drug that potentially refutes this assessment. So that author is saying there could be some exceptions there. As best I can tell, two factors account for this. I'm reading the article now. First, many things that previously gave us purpose and meaning have been lost. Because of this, the high from a substance that can fill that void becomes almost irresistible, since it fulfills the vital need every human being has for an existential purpose. This will be covered more in an upcoming article. The author puts there in parentheses. Secondly, the digital age has disconnected us from our bodies because it requires us to be in our heads and minimize our engagement with the physical world. This becomes a severe problem because much of what fundamentally makes people happy, and many people spend their lives searching for it, is a product of being connected to yourself, particularly your body, and our world, which is very different from living in your mind and constantly disassociating from everything. Since people don't have that intrinsic connection, they instead search for fulfillment in things like substances or gravitate toward ideologies like the nihilistic sects of Buddhism mentioned above in this article, that provide an excuse to withdraw from the parts of the world they can't connect to. Additionally, the more disconnected people are from their bodies, the more external influences, e.g. a stressful situation, will destabilize them, and the less they can recognize what is occurring when it happens, thus often making the emotional destabilization feel like an overpowering situation they are powerless against. Note, while I cannot prove this, I believe this shift away from reality has been done so that quote-unquote wealth can be created from nothing, e.g. because people will pay for quote gold online on online video games that is earned by completing repetitive tasks. There have been numerous cases of what is essentially slave labor being performed to obtain it. This then provides a way for the elite to continue to hoard our limited resources while providing the rest of the population with the illusion of wealth. Since this newfound wealth is an illusion, trying to possess it in the same way many covet rare knowledge is not good for the human soul and seems to make us be further and further disconnected from reality. Lastly, Gabor Mate, a well-known Canadian psychiatrist, in his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, shared one of the more interesting perspectives on drug addiction. Mate made a strong case, with the evidence to support it, that drug addiction, especially towards stimulants, e.g. meth or cocaine, often occurs due to childhood trauma that rewired the nervous system's sensitivity and caused the individual to lose the ability to feel loved. Only while they are high on those drugs can they experience that feeling. As many who have had to deal with a drug addict that they are close to can attest, it is incredibly challenging to maintain compassion for the addict due to how far they will go just to keep on getting high. For anyone in that situation, I think Mate's book provides one of the most helpful perspectives I have seen for individuals trying to maintain compassion in those situations. And the author's article goes on to the next headline here, which is psychedelics. While I've never gone down that road, quite a few of my friends have become very committed to using almost every psychedelic in existence for self-development and resolving psychiatric issues such as emotional trauma, and they regularly share their experiences with me. As someone who is frequently around psychedelics, but has no personal investment in them, I feel I can offer one of the more objective perspectives on this subject. In general, I have found that people who regularly use psychedelics for personal growth or healing tend to believe they significantly benefited from doing so and develop egos over the experiences they had on them. However, other than making them more open to spiritual perspectives, it is quite rare for me to encounter someone who appears to significantly have benefited from them. E.g., people talk about how they resolved their emotional traumas and dysfunctions, but often continue to display them identically to how they did before their psychedelic journey. In my eyes, a key misunderstanding with psychedelics is that most of them are not inherently healing, but rather function by significantly increasing the brain's neuroplasticity. Thus, if someone on a psychedelic works with an experienced therapist, they can achieve profound benefits, but if the individual's focus is not on effectively resolving their emotional trauma, which rarely happens without a skilled therapist, the increased neuroplasticity is wasted and in many cases detrimental if the focus of the time is instead on something dysfunctional. Although I have seen many things go awry with psychedelic use, I also fully recognize their value. I have seen some remarkable things with them. People I knew who did LSD psychotherapy decades ago, before it got outlawed, for example, had incredible results with lifelong alcoholics, a condition that is exceptionally difficult to treat. Similarly, I know people who have been able to restore neurological function they lost after a stroke during a guided session of psilocybin and LSD. Andrew Weil, MD, shared one of my favorite examples of what LSD can do on Joe Rogan's podcast. And if you visit this article online, you'll see there's a video clip of Andrew Weil on the Joe Rogan Experience discussing that. While on LSD, a cat jumped in Weil's lap, and at that moment he was able to make his lifelong allergy to cats permanently disappear. Currently, I've seen the best results from ketamine being used therapeutically in guided sessions with a psychiatrist. It can sometimes resolve a wide range of issues. For individual use, many people have told me microdosing LSD or psilocybin greatly aids their creativity. With the people I knew, LSD used to be more commonly used for that purpose. Now psilocybin seems to be more the preferred choice. And I have not yet run across someone with an adverse experience from this practice, from the microdosing. Lastly, individual psychedelic experiences frequently create a very positive outlook on the world for the user. Still, this benefit only requires a few sessions to achieve. It is pretty rare, unless the experience occurred under the supervision of a therapist, that the user will not continue to use psychedelics recreationally after that time. This matters because at that point, I have frequently seen the initial benefits reverse. So the author there is saying that while someone may appear initially to benefit from these psychedelic sessions, continually using those substances recreationally will often lead to a reversal of the benefits to more problems or additional problems. This is a very superficial review of an immensely complex subject. For example, I did not discuss ayahuasca, which is very popular these days, and like the other psychedelics really needs to be done under the supervision of the right person, or DMT, and the remarkable book written by the physician who was allowed to research DMT and for which the documentary is one of the most streamed documentaries on Netflix. Similarly, I did not discuss how MDMA, ecstasy, is being researched as a treatment for PTSD. I believe that psychedelics have a lot of potential to resolve many of the issues psychiatry presently struggles with, and a few of my psychiatrist colleagues are very committed to moving their profession in that direction. However, it will take a while for the research to be developed to make this happen. It is a relatively recent development that research in this area stopped being taboo, so there is still much to discover. If you decide to do this route, I would strongly advise doing it with a psychiatrist who has earned a reputation for being experienced with psychedelic guided therapy. Furthermore, a lot of things can go wrong with them, especially LSD, and you need to be honest with yourselves about those risks before you choose to go down that route. So before we go into the next section of the article, I'll comment that I agree psychedelics are a quite complex topic with some potential benefits as well as potential risks, and the substance itself is not healing. It's helping shift your brain activity to enable accessing kind of an expanded state of awareness or perception where people can receive spiritual guidance, or they can process trauma and access other material that brings the opportunity for integration or healing, but it doesn't automatically occur just because you take the substance. And by using a substance to open that door, so to speak, you are creating significant risks. So it's kind of opening up your energy field, and negative outside energies can interfere or come into you as well. So that's a concern to be aware of. And also, these substances have toxic effects in the body, so they're not inert. The reason that they're affecting your brain activity is because they're toxic compounds that are disrupting your normal equilibrium or the normal chemistry in your body. So that can have effects in the nervous system and other systems or organs in your body. So especially if you have existing health conditions, you want to be very careful about using anything that has those toxic effects and negative potential in terms of your physiology. There are much safer alternatives, so you don't have to use psychedelics to shift into expanded states of consciousness. You can use breath work, you can use hypnosis, you can use physical movement, you can use fasting. Fasting has some potential risks also, of course. But there's various approaches that help people let go of their critical thinking, their analytical mind for a period of time to connect to deeper layers of consciousness. And in my own work as a hypnotherapist, I'm using hypnosis a lot for that purpose. And it does guide people into states very much akin to what you experience with psychedelics, but in a way where you can withdraw yourself from that state in any moment. You're not forced into it through the chemical effects. So you can guide yourself into it, and you can choose to come back into your normal alert state if you're not ready to go further. So things like hypnosis and breathing and sound, binaural beats, all of those are alternate approaches that can accomplish the same thing that people are using psychedelics for. Let's move on now to the Midwestern Doctor article, and the next segment there is conventional psychiatry. Many consider anxiety to be the disease of the modern age, e.g., since modern marketing aims to condition you to be trapped by the expectation of getting an emotionally needed product in the future. That conditioning makes it very difficult for you to ever be content in the present, instead of constantly being worried about what could happen in the future. Once you are a healthcare provider, it becomes astounding to see just how many people are afflicted with crippling anxiety. For example, at this point in time, 19.1% of U.S. adults had an anxiety disorder in the past year, 31.1% will at some point in their lives, and 4.7% suffer from regular feelings of depression. Similarly, consider the results of a recent survey, and there's a graphic shown there that says, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems? And it has the bars for different generational groups: Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers. And so it asks on 3 different questions here, or 3 different problems people might experience. The first one, feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge. And Gen Z is the highest with all of these. So Gen Z was 61%, Millennials 53%, Gen X 40%, and Boomers 28%. And there's a similar pattern with somewhat less prevalence for feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, and having thoughts that you would be better off dead, or thoughts of hurting yourself. All of these data points indicate that our current approach to psychiatry is not working unless you view its purpose as being to create a larger and larger market for lifelong consumers of psychiatric medications. Note, Robert Whitaker in Anatomy of an Epidemic makes an excellent case that the psychiatric profession's mass adoption of psychotropic medications worsened rather than improved mental health in the countries where they were deployed. I have also seen this transpire on a smaller scale at a facility with an excellent reputation for the results it had gotten that used non-medication approaches for treating mental illness. After it was taken over by medicating psychiatrists, switching to a pharmaceutical model resulted in the patient outcomes there dramatically worsening until the facility eventually had to disband. The dynamic I observed at that facility is a microcosm of much of what I have seen within psychiatry, where many excellent approaches, e.g. therapeutic hypnosis, got pushed out by the money behind the psychiatric drugs. When I went into medicine, the specialty I felt the most affinity towards was psychiatry. There are many amazing and immensely fascinating things with it, and many of my colleagues thought psychiatry was the specialty that best fit my personality. This often decides what specialties medical students pick. However, I had such deeply held objections to the psychiatric drugs, I simply could not bring myself to spend 4 years medicating patients during a residency to enter the profession. Note, there are a variety of effective approaches for dealing with depression. One of the things I have been continually amazed by is how often St. John's wort herb, which is relatively safe and readily available, tends to outperform all the psychiatric medications on the market, which to some extent is one of the best arguments I have ever seen against a free market functioning America, given that the herb is almost free. In contrast, over $10 billion is spent on SSRI medications annually. Next, the headline, Biological Causes of Mental Illness. Although I disagree with the disproven chemical imbalance hypothesis that has been used for decades to market psychiatric medications, in addition to the energetic and spiritual aspects of mental illness, which will be further discussed in future articles, there are a variety of biological causes of mental illness. The widespread lack of awareness of these causes in psychiatry still surprises me, since, at least in theory, psychiatrists are doctors tasked with medically addressing the root causes of their patients' illnesses, not just prescribing lots of psychiatric medications. Some of the common causes include infections. Lyme disease and toxoplasmosis are the most well known for doing this. Others exist too, and if you can identify and treat the microbe, significant benefit often occurs. Nutritional deficiencies. Many of these exist. Vitamin B1 and B12 deficiency, particularly in the elderly, are two common ones, best treated with subcutaneous injections of an aluminum-free preparation. That's something that could be discussed in more depth, what are the best way to treat deficiencies. Amino acid deficiencies, most easily addressed with a good amino acid supplement, have a variety of causes, e.g. poor protein consumption or poor digestion of protein in the stomach. There are also common causes of psychiatric issues. Trace mineral deficiencies, many of these exist. Low doses of lithium orotate and, to a lesser extent, normal doses of magnesium orotate or threonate, for example, can be extremely helpful for addressing anxiety. Neurotoxic pharmaceuticals. I believe one of the most significant problems with pharmaceuticals is the neurological damage they cause, which then creates psychiatric effects that are erroneously assumed to cause a gaslighted patient's illness rather than being a symptom of the pharmaceutical injury. I have previously written about two classes of drugs this is frequently observed with: statin drugs and the SSRI antidepressants, but many more cause this as well. To some extent, this also happens with pharmaceuticals that damage other parts of the body. For example, the heart damage caused by the COVID vaccines frequently causes an anxiety-provoking, irregular and accelerated heart rate that is almost always misdiagnosed as being caused by anxiety. Impaired circulation to and from the brain. This is most commonly associated with the belligerent, e.g. loss of personal inhibition, personality changes of frontotemporal dementia. Sadly, this is also a common side effect of the COVID-19 vaccines, which I'd previously discussed in relation to causes of Alzheimer's disease. Fluid stagnation throughout the body. When the fluids within the body stagnate, the same is also seen with the emotions, thereby preventing them from freely flowing and leaving you. This is why certain exercises are often so remarkably effective for improving mental health, and may also be part of why the COVID-19 vaccines, which impair fluid circulations through the body, adversely affect mental health. Compressions. Frequently, especially after a traumatic brain injury, individuals will have parts of their head become slightly compressed. I've seen numerous cases of psychiatric illnesses that began after traumatic brain injury and persisted until they saw a manual therapist capable e.g. an experienced craniosacral therapist decompressing their skull, and I have also seen less overt emotional difficulties respond similarly. I also often see something similar in the center of the chest, which is where people often feel anxiety. As best as I can tell, this is because more space is created in this area. People often feel as though a weight is off their chest, they have more space to breathe, and the metaphorical walls they feel around them are no longer closing in on them. Scars. One school of medicine called neural therapy believes that many problems arise from hypersensitive nerves. If a local anesthetic is applied to those nerves, the nerve reverts to normal when the anesthesia wears off. This issue is most commonly encountered within scars. In the field of neural therapy, initially just anesthetized, e.g. with lidocaine, each scar the patient had, and then went with continuing to anesthetize the ones that gave improvement. One of the many benefits I have observed from neural therapy were profound improvements in chronic psychiatric issues. For example, one patient at the VA who had served in Iraq had severe PTSD, which resolved after his scars from an IED explosion were injected with lidocaine. In another instance, an early 30s female had chronic burning pain and a variety of psychiatric issues, e.g. anxiety. She had been medicated on for well over a decade. After her scar from a significant injury in childhood was anesthetized with lidocaine, both the pain and the psychiatric issues immediately resolved. As mentioned in this article, I have also seen cases where more advanced neural therapy aimed at dysfunctional neurons rather than just scars appeared to have dispersed a fluid clump within the body, and the release of some deep traumatic emotional patterns within them followed this. Vagal dysfunction. I believe that one of the most common causes of mental illness in the country, particularly anxiety or irregular heart rates, is vagal nerve dysfunction. The automatic branch of your nervous system has two parts: the sympathetic fight or flight and parasympathetic rest or relax parts of the nervous system, and each of these counterbalances the other. Note: one of the most commonly used classes of pharmaceuticals is drugs that, quote, rebalance the autonomic nervous system by increasing or decreasing sympathetic or parasympathetic activity. An enormous number of drugs on the market do this, although it is highly debatable just how much many of them help their recipients. Many people believe the root cause of disease in our society is excessive sympathetic nerve activation due to all the stressful situations we encounter. The more significant issue is a lack of parasympathetic nerve function, almost all of which is mediated through the vagal nerve. Because of the scope of this problem, I have looked at more approaches to improving vagal function. At this point, I believe the primary issue is the vagal nerve being compressed, and that having a manual therapist address this compression is the fastest and most effective way to improve vagal function, although many of the other approaches can be helpful to consider once the vagal nerve has been decompressed. My leading hypothesis for why vagal nerve issues are so common is that the vagus nerve exits your brain at the back of you at the base of your skull. This matters because when we look at screens, we typically bend our necks forward, which puts a lot of strain on the muscles in the back of your neck that keep your head from going too far forward. Our modern behavior thus chronically tightens these muscles, which in turn chronically compress the vagus nerve. In addition to these causes, many others exist as well, that I will review in future articles. For example, Chinese medicine has a remarkable model of mental health that ties many emotions to individual organs rather than the brain, and is often very helpful for addressing challenging psychiatric issues. So now my own comment or interjection is that there are many different physical, biological factors that can affect mental health. It's kind of like a feedback system, and a disturbance on any level can be reflected in a disturbance in the other levels. So if something disrupts your biochemistry, then your emotions and thinking will be shifted also. And a very obvious illustration of that is taking any psychoactive drug. A person could be in a pretty calm, centered state, functioning seemingly smoothly, and then they take a significant dose of some medication, and that pretty quickly shifts the way they're acting. So there, something that's an input on the physical level creates a pretty immediate psychological shift in their mood or their behavior. I would add that heavy metal toxins are another common factor in psychiatric issues, and those affect the gut, they affect the nervous system, they can do so in pretty direct ways. So looking into both deficiencies in minerals but also toxicities is an important factor in exploring the physical or biochemical contributors to psychological disturbances. Coming back to Midwestern Doctor's article now, the next headline is Integrative Psychiatry. Since there are so many potential approaches to psychiatry, numerous psychiatrists combine integrative medicine with psychiatry and often can get excellent results for their patients. Unfortunately, like other branches of integrative medicine, this type of care is nearly impossible to have covered with insurance and must instead usually be paid for with cash. Integrative psychiatry utilizes many different approaches, including the modalities described throughout this article, so it's not possible for me to synopsize the discipline here. However, I would like to share two examples from functional medicine. First, minor genetic variations seen in the population are known as SNPs. Numerous SNPs alter psychological behavior, e.g. the COMT SNPs are well known and associated with anxiety-related personality traits. Many of these SNPs can be addressed with supplement regimens that compensate for the abnormal enzyme functions resulting from the SNPs. Secondly, I would like to discuss the work of William Walsh, PhD. Walsh spent 20 years building a database of 2,800 depressed individuals, which had over 300,000 analyses of blood and urine, and identified 5 common patterns that were seen. The first pattern was undermethylated depression, which was associated or considered to arise from low activity of serotonin receptors due to rapid reabsorption after serotonin is released into a synapse. This occurred in 38% of the patients he studied and is not serotonin deficiency, but an inability to retain the serotonin in the synapse for a necessary amount of time. Patients usually report excellent improvements in mood with SSRIs, but for some serious side effects, such as headache or loss of libido, occur. Nutrient therapy should avoid phthalates, but use SAMe methionine. Other nutrients such as zinc, serine, inositol, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A, B6, C, D, and E can be supplemented as needed. So that's one pattern connected with depression that was observed. And symptoms and traits of those people seem to be their strong-willed tendency toward obsessive-compulsive disorder, calm exterior with high inner tension, competitive and perfectionistic, addictive tendencies, high libido, and more than 75% exhibit seasonal allergies. Undermethylated people are the classic depressives according to Walsh. Highly depressed but typically able to hide it. Undermethylation tends to run in families. About 20% of babies are undermethylated at birth. The next pattern was high copper depression, which is marked by extreme levels of copper in the blood and brain, causing a dopamine deficiency and norepinephrine overload. Increased copper retention is necessary to rapidly produce capillaries and blood vessels for the growing fetus, and some mothers are unable to eliminate the excess copper. Walsh suspects that postpartum depression is usually caused by copper overload. 17% of the depression patients in the study fit that category. Most reported little effect from taking SSRIs, but gained relief from embarking on nutrient therapy to normalize levels of copper. Symptoms and traits there, more than 95% female, with onset during hormonal event, high anxiety, tendency to panic, estrogen intolerance, tinnitus, sensitive skin, intolerance to cheap metals. So the people that react to jewelry with cheap metals, which would make sense if they have a copper metal overload. The next group in that depression study were ones with pyroluric depression. That occurs when serotonin production is impaired and there is a high level of oxidative stress. The production of pyrroles, hydroxyhemopyrrolin, can increase with stress, which in turn decreases zinc and B6, nutrients that are essential for the production of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, melatonin, GABA, and acetylcholine. SSRIs were advantageous for the 15% of patients with the pyroluric depression. Nutrient therapy includes normalizing B6 and zinc, adding antioxidants, and augmenting with biotin and primrose oil. Symptoms and traits of those individuals included severe mood swings, extreme anxiety and fears, poor short-term memory and reading disorders, little to no dream recall, sensitivity to light and noise, and abnormal fat distribution. And then the next category in that depression study were those with low folate depression. This is of critical importance in that most of the shooters in some 50 school shootings over the past decades likely had this type of depression, according to Walsh. For these patients, taking SSRIs can lead to suicidal or homicidal ideation. Nutrient therapy using folic acid and vitamin B12 supplements helped patients in the study. For some, anti-anxiety drugs such as Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, and Ativan were beneficial. 20% of the patients in Walsh's study fell into this category. Symptoms and traits of those individuals included high tendency for anxiety and panic, non-competitive in sports and games, food and chemical sensitivities, high musical or artistic ability, underachievement, sleep disorders, absence of inhalant allergies, low libido, and tend to be people persons constantly talking. And then the fifth subset of people in that study on depression had what he calls toxic metal depression. is caused by toxic metal overload, usually lead poisoning. The removal of lead from paint and gasoline has lowered the frequency of these cases. Walsh estimates that about 5% of depressed patients currently fall into this category. Nutrient therapy concentrates on zinc, glutathione, selenium, and other antioxidants, and calcium in the special case of lead poisoning. In severe cases, hospitalization and chelation may be necessary. Symptoms and traits: unrelenting depression, abdominal distress, tendency toward irritability and or anger, absence of trauma or emotional triggers, food sensitivities, metallic taste in mouth, and bad breath. When you read through this, it is almost hard to believe that despite his research being available for decades, virtually no one in psychiatry knows about this, especially since so much of what psychiatrists do is treat depression. Note: Walsh has made other very insightful discoveries with other common psychiatric disorders. His work can be viewed on his institute's website and is further discussed in his book, Nutrient Power: Heal Your Biochemistry and Heal Your Brain. Walsh's work touches upon the much broader discipline of orthomolecular psychiatry, a field which has linked nutritional disorders to a wide range of psychiatric disorders, e.g. a niacin deficiency to schizophrenia. I have been drawn to this discipline long before I became a doctor, and there are a remarkable number of insights the field has created, which unfortunately go far beyond the scope of what I can fit within a single article. Note: there are also a variety of important aspects of integrative psychiatry, such as those which relate to avoiding food allergies, e.g. food colorings appear to trigger ADD, or balancing and optimizing hormone levels. While I have studied both of these and seen them work, I do not consider them to be my fields of expertise and thus avoided discussing them here. So that comes to the end of the section on the nutritional and orthomolecular and integrative psychiatry treatments. And that's just a small sample, a little tiny piece of what integrative psychiatry could include. We can recognize that there are multiple layers to things, and what's happening on the biochemical level definitely affects our psychological state, but also our stresses in life, our personality, how we're responding to our life situations is going to have an effect on the body. Our body is enabling our experience here in the physical realm, so your chemistry is going to change when you have a certain reaction to something in your life experience. You have a breakup with a partner and you experience some sense of shock, of betrayal, abandonment, whatever emotions are coming up, grief, and all of that is expressed in your body. Your body chemistry is going to reflect that. And that doesn't mean you need to be given a label of a disorder and given a drug to override or suppress what you're feeling. You often will benefit from allowing the feelings to flow through, to not be stuck, to not build up. So I'll come now back to the Midwestern Doctor article and the conclusion section there. In conclusion, the author states, one of the significant challenges I face with writing this Substack blog is deciding what to cover at what time, because there is always much more I want to delve into than there is time for. The specific issue of individuals suppressing and withdrawing from emotions kept coming up over and over for different people in my life over the last week. So I took that as a sign it was time to write about it. On the surface, emotional contractions seem like a very abstract or esoteric concept. Still, once you learn to recognize them, you quickly see how pervasive they are and will wonder how you never saw them before. Initially, one of the best signs of an emotional contraction is if you notice you or someone else blinks exactly in sequence with saying something. This is because blinking is a reflex the body will frequently do when it is internally conflicted about something it is saying, such as when someone says something that deep down they don't actually believe. Note, the body language community considers blinking not to be a good indicator to use to determine if someone is lying, because people also spontaneously blink all the time. However, if you focus on identifying blinks perfectly synchronized with statements, especially if you also feel something tightening up concurrently with the blink, they are extremely useful for reading people. One of the most significant problems in our society is how often people lie to themselves. E.g., they say something they think they should say, even though their hearts and body conflict with it. Once you train your perception to focus on recognizing emotional contractions, it becomes astounding to see firsthand how pervasive this issue is. When I've reflected on why terrible things, e.g. the Holocaust, tend to happen throughout history, I tend to find they too are a manifestation of this issue. More specifically, in many instances where something horrific happens, it does not come out of nowhere. Instead, the evil first transpires on a small scale and gradually grows and grows until it becomes normalized and can be conducted on a horrific scale. In the case of the deadly COVID-19 mandates, we saw this happen in two different ways. First, most of what was done with them had been done on a smaller scale with many other toxic pharmaceuticals and had become an expected norm not enough people spoke out against prior to COVID-19. Secondly, throughout the entire pandemic, gradually escalating bad policies much of the public disagreed with, e.g. masking and lockdowns, or denying safe and effective care for COVID-19 while pushing dangerous hospital protocols, became normalized, paved the way for the highly unpopular vaccine mandates. During the escalation period, a large portion of the population can tell what is happening is wrong. However, because it's difficult to speak out against the existing narrative, they choose to deny those feelings, close their hearts and minds down, and instead say the safe thing to go along with the crowd's narrative. This emotional contraction is a huge problem, and I strongly believe it is a root cause of many of the terrible things that have happened throughout history. Since my family suffered through numerous genocides, I have always made a point to note when something I feel is very wrong is happening, and then ask if I am choosing to indirectly support it because that's the, quote, easy thing for me to do. For example, I believe animals have a significant degree of consciousness, and I feel what happens within the processed meat industry and slaughterhouses is horrific and something you cannot ethically support. Conversely, I have no issues with people eating humanely raised meat and actually support it because I feel economically supporting those operations is the most effective thing we can do to promote animal welfare. Whenever I bring up this topic with people who eat factory farmed meat, I can tell many people essentially feel the same way I do, but choose to deny those feelings and close their minds to what is happening because it is easier. After I watched this dynamic for a few years, I decided I would only ever eat meat I felt was ethically raised, with no exceptions whatsoever, because if I did otherwise, I was willfully engaging in the same conduct I saw create so many different problems throughout history. And note from the author, Matthias Desmet's theory of mass formation provides one of the best explanations for what we have all watched transpire throughout the pandemic, best summarized in this remarkable interview with Tucker Carlson. And there's a link here in the article for that interview. A key point he made was that those deadly dynamics established themselves in society because those who could speak out against them do not do so. I believe the tendency toward emotional and mental contractions detailed throughout this article explains why many people do not do what they know deep down is right in those situations. I sincerely hope you have found this to be a productive topic to explore, and that it has left you with an appreciation of the importance of being connected to ourselves and those around us. In this article, the major topics I skipped were sleep and addressing trauma. In the second half of the series, I'll delve into both and share the best method I have found for resolving deep psychological issues, which often requires addressing insomnia and releasing trapped emotions. So that's the end of the article by a Midwestern doctor. Again, you can find it at midwesterndoctor.com, and the other articles and writings by that author, which have been referenced in this article. So now, coming to my final comments on this topic. As human beings, a big part of our experience is the emotional layer or level, and emotions naturally flow. They're meant to come through us to give us feedback about our experience, and then to release, to move on in a sense. We don't want to be continually living and reacting to the same experience or same moment for our whole life. We need to flow forward to the next experiences, to the next phenomena in our life. But if we constrict and try to hold back those emotions, we don't let them come through, and they're unprocessed. They're just stuck there waiting to come up when we give them another chance to come up. And part of what happens is they're unconsciously guiding us to recreate and replay similar situations so that we will have another chance to bring up those emotions for their release and healing. So I encourage anyone who's listening or watching to consider ways that you can bring out and release whatever emotional baggage, in a sense, has accumulated within yourself, within your subconscious mind, within your body, within your aura or energy field. And there are a variety of holistic healing approaches that can help. For anyone who's looking to explore more about holistic healing resources, I invite you to visit my website, phinsights.com. That's phinsights.com. And as a final point, I'm making the disclaimer that my videos are for educational purposes. They're not intended to provide diagnosis or treatment advice or instructions for anyone's individual physical or mental health concerns. You are encouraged to consult a qualified professional to address any individual issues or concerns you may be dealing with. For now, I'd like to wish everyone a pleasant day. Namaste.